Well, let's talk now to Pyotr Kurzin, a former UN official and host of the Global Gambit podcast. Pyotr, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on The World today. So what do you think is left to be discussed now, and where is this heading from now?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me. It's a pretty difficult thing to assess, because just because you start talks doesn't mean that they necessarily will end in some kind of deliverable or product. But in this, I think what the Trump administration is quickly learning is that this has to be done in elements. The idea of a comprehensive ceasefire agreement was never really realistic. And in this case, they're going to be looking at things like continued evolvements of the humanitarian angles, such as about POW swaps, but also about certain things like energy ceasefires, energy security ceasefires, stopping the continued attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, because as we've seen, this is the hardest winter of the four thus gone, and ultimately trying to ensure that the Russians don't strike across the whole of the country is unlikely. But equally, the Russians need a break from the Ukrainians' relentless and remarkable strikes on Russian oil refineries, which have been proven to be a huge Achilles heel in the side for Putin at the moment.
Let's talk a little bit now about the I suppose the compromises that each side are willing to make and not to make. Where do you think the red lines lie for Russia and Ukraine right now?
I don't think they've ever changed for the Russians. A lot of analysts will argue about the initial peace proposals that were first made in April of 2022, and the idea that this was the closest that we might have gotten to peace. But then, due to one reason or another, that was never signed. And so the Russians have ultimately had these maximalist demands. Putin is someone who sees Ukraine in a very specific way, a war of conquest in many ways. And ultimately, he wants to, in my mind, it has always been about not necessarily physically controlling all of Ukraine, but controlling it sort of like Belarus through a sort of puppet regime or whatever, de facto sort of second state. And ultimately also, I think, physically controlling parts of what in Russia's known as Novorossiya, or New Russia, which is largely the eastern and southern parts of the country. But other than that, of course, it's the protection of the Russian language, it's the denazification, demilitarization, and all the things we've heard many times. But from the Ukrainian perspective, it is obviously not about giving too many territorial concessions, because if you do that, that enables Russia to benefit from a certain greater confidence. Putin can demonstrate to the Russian people that he's getting what he wants. He's standing up to the expansionist, imperialist threats of the West or NATO, etc. Therefore, the point is that these two are diametrically opposed on their interests and wants. And therefore, we can talk about gradual shift towards more peace talks in certain capacities, but an ultimate peace deal, let alone a ceasefire, is still very far off. But, and the last point I'd make is simply that the fact that we are having these trilateral talks in Geneva, the very first ones in Europe since the war fully took off, is a notable step. And I think it's because the Russian economy is not looking very good.
OK, Pyotr, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you very much.